Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. A man murders a baby, goes to prison, and escapes. How does this happen? Who's to blame? And most importantly, is he ever caught? It's the case of Edwardsolly right now on Love and Murder. Welcome everyone, welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, the weekly true crime podcast discussing relationships gone horribly wrong, where our motto is, you're either someone's last love or their first murder. I am your host Kai, and in today's episode, we're talking about an infamously horrible case that you've probably heard of. I know I haven't. It's actually a bit similar to the case of John List, and you'll see how. But at the end of the episode, you're probably going to say something like, Kai, how have you not heard about this case? What kind of true crimer are you? Well, in response, to be fair, I don't know every case. Be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder right now while you're listening so you don't miss a case. If you didn't know, you can also subscribe to our Patreon so that you don't have to hear intros or commercials just like this one. Actually, I wanted to say that this episode is sponsored by the lambs in my Patreon group. Huge thank you to my sponsors. Let's hear a round of applause. If you want to become a patron and subsequently an esteemed sponsor, go to patreon.com/love and murder. You get commercial-free episodes, no intro, episode extras, and so much more over there. www.patreon.com/love and murder. You can also just search Love and Murder Premium Feed on Spotify and get the bonuses over there as well. Now, you can quickly find the link for all of this in the show notes below. In the meantime, though, grab your butts, grab your apple juice, and let's get into some, say it with me now, Love and Murder. Edwardsolly was born on September 5th, 1945 in Gloucester City, New Jersey. Now, he's called Edward, so for the remainder of this episode, we'll just refer to him as Edward. Among other things, you'll see what I'm talking about. I couldn't really find anything about his youth or anything prior to this case, so that's when everything picks up at the time of this case. Edward's life took a significant turn when he got into a relationship with Linda Welsh, a woman who had a young son named Christopher Welsh. Together, they shared a home in Runnymede, New Jersey. However, Edward's character was far from, quote, good boyfriend material. And I had to say quote because you can't see me doing the air quotes. He was an alcoholic. And when he was under the influence of alcohol, he became violent and just a horrible person, just a horrible guy. On the evening of Friday, July 25th, 1969, Edward, driven by alcohol and angry, subjected Linda's 2-year-old son to a brutal beating. Basically, he beat him so badly that he killed him. Edward turned himself in to local authorities a few days later. Now, I do want to point out, in some publications, I see that he turned himself in. In some publications, I see that they went to get him. I don't know which one it is. But either way, police got him a few days after this. The legal proceedings that followed resulted in him getting a 15 to 20-year sentence. During his sentence at Trenton State Prison in Trenton, New Jersey, Edward's mother and grandmother started a letter writing campaign trying to allege that the prison guards were mistreating Edward. And to which I say, okay, he murdered a 2-year-old. But I guess that's his mom and his grandmother. But then again, that's probably where his impatience and attitude comes from. They keep giving him excuses, which then led to him being the kind of man that would angrily murder a 2-year-old, beat him to death. I can't even. So because of that letter writing campaign, in 1974, Edward ended up being transferred to a minimum security prison, Leesburg State Prison. It was at Leesburg that he found a friendship with a prison psychologist. Isn't that the first rule of being a psychologist? No relationships with your patients. And do I even have to tell you, as a prison psychologist, definitely no relationships with your patients? They also tell you don't allow the patient to get attached to you. And of course, in return, you can't get attached to the patient. So rule number 1 is broken. Let's see what's going on here. The psychologist convinced prison officials. The psychologist convinced prison officials to let Edward go out to visit his mother. So, some prisons have plans where an inmate who is on good behavior for long periods of times, they can go out, go to work. And I guess, I hadn't heard of this one, but I guess visit family. Maybe his family's sick or something like that. And then they send them out with a guard, but they do trust them to come back to prison at the end of the day. This is called a furlough, which is weird to me, but I don't make the laws. So Edward was allowed to go out on furlough. And by the third visit in 1974, the prison allowed Edward to visit his family only accompanied by the psychologist as his guard. Really? So what do you think happened? If you said he escaped, then you would be right. Your prize is in the mail, but it's actually not. Edward had asked to go visit his girlfriend. News to which I said, who in their right mind would be with someone who killed a 2-year-old boy by beating him to death? So of course his friend said, sure, I trust you, and allowed him to leave. Under the pact of trust and respect, Edward immediately escaped. Immediately. He didn't even consider what this would do to his friend. As soon as the psychologist got the K out in okay, Elmer wasn't even in the room anymore. Dummy. Then, because he knew he was in trouble, the psychologist didn't report his escape for 6 hours, which, by this time, Edward was somewhere in Timbuktu already. Immediately after he left, Edward started using pseudonyms. In 1975, he ended up being arrested in Philadelphia, Philly, PA, because he had stolen goods on him. But because he used a fake name, police didn't know who they had in their custody. They didn't know the significance of who they had in their custody. So, they let him go. Then in 1979, he was stopped in traffic for a traffic violation. And again, he used a fake name. So they just wrote him up and let him go. Again, they didn't know who they had. They're still searching for him, by the way. And they actually had basically no leads. His family was not talking. They were shut down. I don't know. Ma'am, we'll put you in jail. Put me in jail then. I don't know where he is. Ma'am, we know you know where he is. Look, do what you gotta do. Either arrest me or not, but I don't know where he is. And this was all fueled and run and watched over by his mother, Edna Bolt. So after some time with no leads and stopping him countless times but not knowing who he is, and the roadblocks put up by his mom, his case turned into a cold case. In the meantime, Edward is traveling all over the United States, and he eventually made his way to Florida. When he got to Florida, he decided that he was going to change his name now to Vinnie Taylor. Now, Vinnie Taylor is the lead guitarist of a rock group called Shanana. Never heard of them in my life. I don't know if y'all have, but I never have. Now, this is like, for instance, somebody escaping from prison and just, taking on the name Brad Pitt. What? Who would do something like that? Wouldn't people know who the lead guitarist of Shanana is? So he was able to do this because the real Vinny had died earlier in 1974 of a heroin overdose. But then Edward forged documents, including a social security card. He had a birth certificate and he had a baptism certificate and was able to pass himself off as Vinny. He then went out and told everyone that his death was fake And he wanted to do this so then he could take a new stage name as Daniel Catalano, so Danny C. So there's this whole thing. He said, yeah, it's show business, man. I faked my death because, you see, Vinny's dead. Now I go by Danny C. So that's what he did. And then he started performing and recording under Danny C. Then the group, Shanana, found out what was happening and went to Edward and be like, what are you doing? No, you cannot do this. You cannot say you're Vinny because you're not Vinny. And then you can't perform as Danny C. And Edward was like, well, what are you going to do? Stop me then. Stop me. And the group was like, well... And they actually did consider filing a lawsuit, but then they decided not to do it because they didn't want to give free publicity to Edward. So this is what their mindset was, because if they file a lawsuit, then of course it's going to be in the papers. It's going to go to court. It's going to have cameras in there, and it's going to give Edward free publicity as Danny C to now push his music more. So they decided not to do that. So he just continued on. He put out a website. He had fans go in there and log in. They were able to see who he performed with, everything. He just I don't know, that's some cajones for real. Then he met, a small group who was up and coming musicians, and he asked them if their group could back him up on stage. So of course, they feel like this is Danny C, and this is the big break they were waiting for. Quote, we featured Tommy and the Saints, and then we featured Danny C from Shanana. We sold it out. So they were just ecstatic. Then he met a woman, Jessica Hart. And to Jessica, Danny C was the man she'd been looking for, the man of her dreams. Quote, I just felt safe with him. Our relationship just flowed. It couldn't have been any better. End quote. Jessica and Danny C then moved in together, bought a house, beachfront property, and Danny C continued on with his music, released a new video. But as they were living together, Jessica started noticing some weird stuff. Quote, we would be in bed at night, and he would just jump out of bed and run to the window. He never wanted people coming into our apartment, and he would tell me a lot of times, whatever you do, just don't bring up the Shanana thing. He was a little paranoid about little certain things. If I would talk to somebody, he would ask me, what'd that guy say? And then I had some people come over to me at some show saying that he wasn't there. The right guy, he's a phony. That's what they told me. Then his bandmates, remember those two that I said were up and coming and he asked them to play for him? They started getting similar complaints too. One of them, Mara, said, quote, the owner of the show palace came up to me and said, we got a problem. There's people here that say Danny C's a phony. I says, what? That can't be. I mean, he says he's Danny C. He's got the jewelry. After that, his bandmates started doing some digging. They literally called up Shanana and, quote, I talked to Scott and he told me he was not the former member of Shanana. We don't know this guy. This guy's a fraud. End of story. He also said, this Danny C couldn't be Danny C. He couldn't be Vinny Taylor because I know Vinny Taylor, and Vinny died of a drug overdose in 1974. So this is what Shanana actually told them. So his bandmate goes up to him and was like, what the hell? What's going on? I just called Shanana and they said that you are not Vinny. You're a fraud. So then Danny says, quote, he told me he was Taylor. He was the legit Taylor. And that's when he sent me all the proof. End quote. And then the proof is his fake birth certificate, his fake social security card. Like, who sends somebody their birth certificate? Who sends somebody their... Once you did that, once you sent me your social security card and your birth certificate, I don't trust you. Because nobody actually freely gives that information to just regular people. I would just say, believe me or not, like, you can quit the band then. But I'm not sending you my social security card and my birth certificate. Sending you? No. Now I don't believe you. Now, in all this time while Edward is here playing rock and roll singer, police are still looking for him. In 1999, New Jersey State Police, Lewis Kinkle, and Cumberland County Sheriff's Office investigators reopened the case. They then called Frank Bender. Do y'all remember Frank Bender? Remember the guy who did the bust of John List? Back in the John List episode, go back and listen to that episode. They called him, gave him Edward's pictures from when he was 25 years, and asked him to draw what he thinks Edward would look like now. So that's what Frank did. And they started putting out all these pictures. The next year, probably just a couple of months after that, March 2000, Edna died. Soon as she died, probably at the funeral, police went and spoke to Edward's father. And they didn't really have to pressure him that much. He came out with, quote, "Look, all I know is that he's a singer and he goes by the name Danny C." End quote. That is all police needed. They ran and did a web search for Danny C. and found him. There's Edward, calling himself Danny C., the bad boy of Shanana. And the site featured a picture of Edward, which actually looked almost exactly like the picture that Frank drew. So with this information, they hopped on the next flight to Orlando. Then from Orlando, they went to St. Pete's Beach. While they're just walking down the walkway, they see a guy fishing. And they walk up to this guy. And wouldn't you believe it? It's freaking Edward, just fishing on the pier near his apartment. Later on, they asked Edward, what was this moment like? Like, how were you feeling in this moment? And he said, quote, "Devastating. Devastating because my world that I knew now had totally exploded." He also tried to explain to police that he never meant to kill the 2-year-old boy. But police was like, look, whatever. There's no freaking way it was an accident that you beat a baby to death. Do you know how many times you had to keep punching and hitting and everything? But Edward came back and said, quote, "I never had any violence on my record. I'm not known as a violent person." Police said, yeah, whatever. And U.S. Marshals arrested him on May 10th, 2001. And he was sent right back to Jersey on May 18th. On October 5th, he was convicted for his 1974 escape, and they sent him right back to prison at Riverfront State Prison in Camden to serve out his sentence for escaping and the remainder of his sentence for the manslaughter. So he's supposed to be behind bars until 2010. And of course, his arrest was plastered on the front page news in Florida. Now, while he's in prison, Jessica is still with him. They keep writing each other. They're writing in prison. And she believes that he's not guilty. She does not think that he did this. And she just thinks, police have the wrong guy. There's no way this guy did this. He's such a great guy. We bought a beachfront property. Oh my God, who buys beachfront property if they murdered a 2-year-old? And she was waiting for him to get exonerated. In the meantime, she married him while he was in prison. She decided she wasn't going to wait. He was the man of her dreams. And so they got married while he was in prison. However, the actual band, Shanana, was like, quote, "As much as one of us is tempted to find humor in this, when it turns out that the person in question is a murderer, and not only that, the murderer of a child, the humor really ends." End quote. Now, like I said, he is supposed to be in prison until 2010. However, for some reason, prison loves him, and he was granted parole in August of 2003. So he was arrested in 2001, and they paroled him in 2003. He escaped, he murdered a 2-year-old, and this dude was out in 2 years. Was it even 2 years? Yeah, 2 years and some months for good behavior and time served. Are you serious? And then he's supposed to be on parole until 2011, but he's out living his life on parole until 2011. And check this. I thought Jessica loved him so much. However, they're not together. His last known whereabouts was in a welfare motel in Jersey. However, he was supposed to be paroled until 2011, but on November 30th, 2007, he died in Gloucester City, New Jersey, at the age of 62. I looked up his obituary, and surprisingly, somewhere in all of this, he had children. Pamela Solly of Parker, Colorado, and Deborah Denek of Brandon, South Dakota. That was literally a shock to me. And that is the case of Edward Solly. What do you think about this case? To me, like, I can't even fathom it. Like, he murdered a child, like I said before. He escaped, and you barely gave him any time. You realized he made a fool of y'all because you stopped him so many times, and still, because of quote-unquote good behavior, you let him out? To me, that's insane. I want to hear what you think about this case. And, as usual, you have 3 ways of sharing your thoughts with me. You can, 1, tell me in the comments below, or you can join the Lamb Facebook group, which is a free and welcoming community on Facebook where you can discuss the case with the rest of the Lambs. Finally, you can join the exclusive Lamb community here at patreon.com/love and murder. Speaking of which, if you join Patreon starting at only $3 a month donation, you get commercial-free episodes. So like this episode, minus the commercials, minus the intro, we just get straight into the story. You also get additions to the case. So if the case has any pictures, any videos, any court files that I found, any evidence files, everything like that, you will get that. You can actually get all of our bonuses now on Spotify if you search Love and Murder Premium Feed. You can just click on the link in the show notes below because that's where I have it, and it's just easier for you there. The best tier for you to get is $5 a month and above, because not only do you get everything that I just talked about, but you also get bonus episodes and access to everything that I post throughout the web. You get all this here in this one little community, www.patreon.com/love and murder. And you'll also be a sponsor. Come on over. I'd love to have you in there. Don't forget, all the social media links are in the show notes below. Follow me on at least one social media so you don't miss like when we have sales or any extras. That's where I post it all, in the social media. And as always, I end each episode by reminding you that it's, say it with me now, say it from the chest, all love and no murder, y'all. Bye. Hey, surprise. It's me again. Kai. Yeah, me. Hey, don't forget to leave me a 5-star review on whatever platform you're on. Please, that helps me out and helps the show. 5 stars. Say whatever you want in the description, but leave me a 5-star. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. AI Jane, next week, are we talking about good stuff, like a good episode, anything good? Or is it more death, murder, and mayhem? What are we doing next week? I really hope it's like a show about how to make spaghetti-filled taco burritos. That would be amazing, don't you think?